The Arctic doesn't kill you with a monster. It doesn't need one. It kills you with silence, with ice that never cracks loud enough to warn you, with a slow, patient erasure that takes months, sometimes years, to finish the job. 7 of the greatest polar explorers in history walked into that silence. Not one of them walked back out the way they expected to. This is how they died. 1. Sir John Franklin. Sir John Franklin didn't enter the Arctic like a desperate man. He entered it like the British Empire expected the map to obey. That was the first mistake. In 1845, Franklin sailed north with 2 of the strongest ships Britain could build, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, experienced crew, heavy supplies, the full confidence of an empire that believed the Northwest Passage could finally be forced open. Then the Arctic closed the door. No storm, no battle, no single moment anyone could point to, just silence. Years passed, rescue ships searched, families waited, and slowly, Britain understood something unbearable. The Arctic had swallowed the expedition whole. The truth came out in pieces. Franklin died before the collapse. The ships froze solid in the ice. The survivors abandoned them and tried to march across a world with no food, no shelter, and no mercy. All 129 men vanished. The Arctic didn't just kill an explorer, it erased an entire expedition slowly enough for the world to imagine every stage of the failure. Franklin sailed north to finish the map. He became one of its darkest blank spaces instead. But while Franklin's men died fighting ice and distance, Henry Hudson discovered something even colder. Sometimes the Arctic doesn't turn against you first. Your own crew does. 2. Henry Hudson. Henry Hudson's final enemy wasn't the ice. It was the men who had stopped believing in him. By 1611, Hudson had pushed his ship, Discovery, deep into the frozen north, hunting a passage through North America. The ship got trapped in what's now Hudson Bay. Supplies ran low. Winter dragged on. The crew grew exhausted, angry, afraid. They wanted home. Hudson wanted to keep pushing. That disagreement turned fatal. When the ice finally broke, the crew made their choice. On June 22, 1611, mutineers forced Hudson, his young son, and a handful of sick or loyal men into a small open boat. Then they cut them loose. No grave, no final letter, no body ever found. Just a tiny boat disappearing into a horizon that never answered. Hudson spent his life searching for a way through the Arctic. In the end, his own crew found a way to remove him from it. If Hudson's story was about mutiny, Charles Francis Hall's was about suspicion so deep it followed him into the grave. 3. Charles Francis Hall. Charles Francis Hall wasn't afraid of the Arctic like other explorers. He'd lived among Inuit communities. He'd studied Franklin's disaster in detail. He believed he understood the North better than the polished officers who treated the ice like a puzzle to solve from a desk. That confidence carried him into the Polaris expedition of 1871, the goal, the North Pole. But the expedition started breaking before the ice did. Bitter rivalries, divided command, personal hatred. Men trapped in the frozen dark, watching each other as closely as they watched the weather. Then Hall came back from a sledging trip and fell violently ill. Before he died, he accused his own crew of poisoning him. At the time, officials called it natural causes. Decades later, his body was exhumed. Tests found lethal levels of arsenic in his remains. It didn't prove murder outright, but it made his final, paranoid accusations impossible to laugh off. The Arctic didn't need to crush his ship or starve his men. It just had to lock suspicious men together until trust collapsed on its own. Hall went north, chasing the pole. He died wondering if the real danger had been sitting across the table the whole time. But George DeLong didn't die from suspicion. He died because he trusted the ice to carry him somewhere it never intended to go. 4. George DeLong, George Washington. DeLong believed the Arctic ice might help him. That belief destroyed him. In 1879, he took the USS Jeannette through the Bering Strait, betting that ocean currents and drifting ice would carry his ship toward the pole. Bold theory. The Arctic punished it. Jeannette froze in place. Days turned into months. Months into years. The ship stopped serving the crew and started imprisoning them, dragged wherever the ice decided to go. Then, in 1881, the ice crushed it. DeLong and his men escaped onto the frozen sea, hauling boats and supplies across a world that broke them down step by step, splitting into groups to try to reach the Siberian coast. Some survived. Most didn't. DeLong died after weeks of exhaustion and exposure. His journal survived him, turning his final days into one of the most painful records in Arctic history. That's the brutal part. He knew the end was coming. He kept writing anyway. The Arctic didn't defeat DeLong with one blow. It just made him keep moving until moving became impossible. And while DeLong trusted a ship, S.A. Andrée trusted something even more fragile, a balloon. 5. S.A. Andrée. S.A. Andrée looked at the Arctic and decided not to cross it by land or sea. He'd fly over it. In 1897, Andrée and 2 companions launched from Svalbard in a hydrogen balloon named the Eagle. All of Sweden watched with pride. The plan: drift over the North Pole and land safely on the other side. For a moment, the future had genuinely risen into the sky. Then it started leaking. The balloon lost gas. Steering failed. What was supposed to be a triumphant flight over the Arctic became a slow, helpless fall into it. They survived the landing. That might be the cruelest part, because now they had to walk. They dragged supplies across drifting ice for months, fighting cold and exhaustion on ground that literally moved beneath them. Eventually, they reached a remote island called Kvitoya. There they died. For 33 years, nobody knew what happened to them. Then in 1930, their final camp was discovered, along with diaries and undeveloped photographs that made their slow disappearance painfully visible for the first time. Andrée tried to escape the Arctic by rising above it. The Arctic just waited below. But Ludvig Mylius-Erichsen's story was different. He wasn't chasing a stunt. He was trying to fix the map. And the map killed him. 6. Ludvig Mylius-Erichsen. Ludvig Mylius-Erichsen died because the Arctic wasn't where the map said it was. Sounds impossible until you understand the mission. He led the Denmark expedition into northeast Greenland to correct blank and mistaken spots on the map. This wasn't spectacle. It was science, measuring, proving, correcting. But in the Arctic, a wrong assumption is a death sentence. Mylius-Erichsen and 2 companions pushed deep into Greenland's frozen unknown and made a real discovery. A major channel that appeared on every existing map didn't actually exist. The truth didn't bring them home. The journey stretched too long. Food ran low. The return route turned out to be far harder than planned. The Arctic let them gather their knowledge, then demanded payment for it. Mylius-Erichsen and 1 companion died before reaching safety. The 3rd man made it farther, leaving behind records that explained the disaster before he froze too. This tragedy is quiet, but it's brutal. These weren't reckless men. They were careful men, destroyed by a world that refused to fit human certainty. Mylius-Erichsen went north to correct the map. The Arctic corrected him first. And then came Roald Amundsen, the man who had survived almost everything, until he went back one final time. 7. Roald Amundsen. Roald Amundsen was supposed to be the man who knew how to survive. That's exactly why his disappearance feels so cold. He'd reached the South Pole. He'd navigated the Northwest Passage. He'd flown over the North Pole. Amundsen wasn't a reckless dreamer. He was disciplined, methodical, famous for planning every detail in advance. If anyone understood the polar world, it was him. But the Arctic doesn't respect reputation. In 1928, the airship Italia crashed on its way back from the North Pole. Amundsen immediately joined the rescue effort, flying north to search for survivors. He never came back. His aircraft vanished. Search parties found nothing. No final message. No wreckage. No grave. Only absence. That's why Amundsen belongs at the end of this story. He wasn't a beginner punished for arrogance. He was one of the greatest polar explorers who ever lived, going back into the Arctic not for glory, but to save someone else. And the Arctic took him anyway. The man who had mastered routes, ice, and survival itself ended the same way as so many before him. Vanished into silence. These 7 men didn't die the same way. Franklin vanished with 2 ships and 129 men. Hudson was cut loose by his own crew. Hall died suspecting the men beside him of poison. DeLong watched his ship become a prison, then a coffin. Andrée fell from the sky and had to walk across the trap waiting below. Mylius-Erichsen was destroyed by distance and a map that lied. Amundsen, the master survivor, vanished trying to save someone else. That's the brutal truth of Arctic exploration. The ice never cared about courage, never cared about rank, science, empire, fame, or how many expeditions you'd survived before. It never cared who brought the strongest ship. To the world, these men were explorers. To history, they became legends. But to the Arctic, they were only ever visitors, and the Arctic has always decided who gets to leave.